So moving us right into our presentation, first I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Tamara Davis. I'm here on behalf of the Progress Center, working as a consultant. My background is in special education. I am a dually certified general and special education teacher, but my heart and my work lies in special education. And then Brittany.
Yes, and I'm Brittany Starrett, also with the Progress Center as a consultant, and also a former educator. So I was a former special ed teacher in middle school, and now I love working directly with teachers to help support something so important as developing the IEP. So we appreciate you all being here. And just a caveat for me, there are some pretty big storms rolling through right now. So if you see me disappear at any time, I may not have power and I'm going to be trying to hop back on. But let's see if we can make it happen for this. Keep it on for the next hour.
All right. So for today's session, by the end of this, we will hope that you have learned strategies for writing IEP goals that are aligned with students' needs, understanding how a single constructed IEP goal can reflect collaboration across IEP goals and promoting that shared ownership, and then leaving you with resources that will support effective goal writing and collaborative planning. So first, to I guess set the scene, which is going to be the base of our discussion today, is using that PLAF statement, that present level of academic achievement and functional performance statement, to develop measurable annual goals. So you may have heard this in many of our sessions, but the basis of our work is from that Andrew F. ruling. So thinking about, is that IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress, appropriate progress in light of the child's circumstances. So that's the basis of our work at the Progress Center. So we always like to just remind you all of that ruling, and where our work stems from. And if you joined our session or the session yesterday morning, with Dr. Tessie Bailey, you may have heard her, or seen this graphic where we talk about what does progress for students with disabilities look like. And at the lowest level, when we think about special education, students advancing towards those annual IEP goals. But in turn, the biggest outcome that we also want to consider too is from their progress in special education, is then making that progress in the grade level, on those state assessments, but most importantly those post-school outcomes for students and what might look like for them. This is a graphic that you'll likely see us talk about a couple of times today. So again, focusing on first that PLAF statement, right? Identifying what are going to be the needs for the student that may need to be addressed for special education and related services. But also you see the arrows here, right? How are all of these things connected? How is the PLAF statement connected to the annual goals and the annual goals connected to those student services? We also have an activity that is aligned with this graphic that I'll share with you. It's called Looking for Connections, right? So, if you're looking at a PLAF statement that is written and you've identified that particular child's needs, how are they being addressed? Is it addressed through the student's annual goals? Are you providing them a service or an aid in order to address that need? So we'll share that with you. It's a really powerful activity and a learning activity to show the interconnectedness between these different components of the IEP. So this may not be news to you, but we always like to, just share some things, maybe revisit things that you already know. But so according to IDA eligibility requirements, these two things must be true: that a student qualifies under one of the 13 disability categories, and they need special education and related services because of that disability. So we know that even though a child may have a disability, it doesn't automatically mean mean that they need special education and related services in order to address their needs that are related to that disability. Sometimes that student may require, may require just a 504, some accommodations and modifications to address their needs, but it doesn't always mean that they automatically need special education and related services to address those needs. And that because we are here to focus on IEP goals, knowing that those IEP goals should address those, again, disability related needs that are identified in the evaluation reports or other data. So the first thing that we're going to look at is one of our Progress Center resources. So our IEP tip sheet that is focused on the PLAF statement. Brittany's going to go ahead and put that link in the chat so that you can bring it up. But what I am going to do on this slide is just bring up what IDEA says about the PLAF statement. I'll give you about 30 or so seconds just to read what's on this slide, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question. Okay, so based on what you're seeing and what you're reading about what IDA says about the PLAB statement, if you don't mind just throwing in the chat, or you can come off mute if you're okay with sharing, what is one thing that stood out to you about what IDA says about the PLAB statement? The focus on the and. Yes, thank you, Lori. And this may be true for all of you. It is also already highlighted too, but that is one thing that we do like to focus on is the and, right? So in the first thing it says is a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and the functional performance. So that's the first thing that we always like to highlight is IDA says that it could just be one statement to say all of these things. Now, your local document, your state or your district's IEP template may require you to break these things out, right? Maybe you're writing multiple statements to either address their areas of academic achievement or their functional performance. But in IDA, it just reads it as one big statement versus multiple. So that's the first thing we always like to point out when we talk about what IDA says about the PLAF statement. Anything else that you notice? Well, another thing that I will also emphasize is again the and, right? That maybe the student might not need a special ed service or special ed or related service in order to address a need, but you're still identifying how are they currently performing in all of these areas. So just another emphasis on it, one being a statement and the and of just listing out those two things. Yes, and Lori also said the impact of the disability. Yep.
And Julianne just said affects the child's involvement in the general education curriculum, and so their access. Yeah.
So focusing on the access, absolutely. So yeah, so you'll notice, so two different areas here for our school age kids and our preschool children. So thinking about their involvement and their progress in the general ed curriculum. So thank you for pointing that out. Yep. Perfect. So I'm going to move us ahead. So thinking about two different things. First, the present levels in terms of their academic achievement and then their functional performance. So here on this slide here, you see academic achievement. Now, the IDEA regulations do not specify these particular areas, but the U.S. Department of Ed has issued guidance on those different areas of academic performance that you may address in that present level. So that can be math, science, history, writing, and reading. So again, with academic achievement, it can be any of these areas in which the child is performing that you would address in the present level. And then in terms of functional performance, I want to raise the question to you all. What functional skills might a student with a disability need to develop to benefit from academic instruction and participate in the school experience? So what will be those different areas in terms of functional skills or examples of functional skills? Executive functioning, social and emotional, social skills. Yeah, so definitely all of these things. So when we think about their functional performance, we are referring to those things that are not considered academic. So what would be their routines of their everyday living, and this is going to be a wide range of things. So on the next slide here, we're showing you or providing you with examples of what those functional skills, which are things that you've already pointed out. So typically when we think about functional skills, we might commonly think about these. So dressing, eating, toileting, mobility. So those everyday living skills. But in addition to that, what you've already pointed out will also include our student social skills, communication, executive functioning, and behavior, which you have all already pointed out. So kudos to you there. So going back to the tip sheet. So I believe Brittany shared this tip sheet in the
Yep, it's
chat.
in the chat.
So again, so on our tip sheets, along with it reviewing what IDA says about the PLAF statement, it also provides you with tips and then the components that you would lay out in terms of developing or writing that PLAF statement. So tips for developing the PLAF statement. So all of these things you would consider. So addressing the student's educational needs that would be identified in the evaluation or data, including a description of changes in student functioning since the last IEP was developed, including objective, measurable data to describe the current performance, and then explaining how specific accommodations and modifications are needed and how they will be used by the student. Um, and this is one point that I do like to emphasize quite a bit because I mean, I'm sure you've seen it all too, right? Where there's IEPs, they have, a ton of accommodations and modifications. But it's always a really good data point if, that student is, for whatever reason, not using those accommodations or modifications. It's a really good practice to include, how are they going, why are they needed, and how are they going to be used? And if it was in that student's prior IEP, it's also a good data point to say, if it was underutilized, maybe, the student didn't feel comfortable using it. Maybe they need more instruction on how to use that particular accommodation or modification. But it's always a really good data point to share how those accommodations or modifications are going to be used. And then additional tips for developing that PLAF statement is structuring that baseline statement using the same structure as you would an IEP goal. So using that level of proficiency, the target behaviors, and all of those different components. And then comparing the students' baseline performance to their grade level expectations. So what do we want students to be able to do as compared to their same age peers? And then lastly, the administration dates and names of those measurement tools that we'll be using to the extent possible. And then I'm going to pass it over to Brittany. Now that we talked about the PLAF, moving us into what IDA says about the measurable annual goals.
Yeah, so we're going to start our talk with about goals, looking back at those core components and how we can align those components. And so on the next slide, you can see that we always start with the PLAT statement, as Tamara just went over, and we identify those key needs, the impact of the disability, and from there we can really pull out some focus areas, some target areas that we can create goals and develop goals from. But while we're developing those goals, of course, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so we want to be thinking about, as we're developing those goals, how we're going to measure those goals. What special ed services or aids are we going to use to help the student make progress with that goal? Where is that goal going to take place, right? And how are we assessing it? Is it related to a state or district assessment? And then thinking about the date, frequency, duration, and the location of the services. And so, although we're taking that PLAFT and we're creating goals from it, we're always thinking about that alignment and how these different pieces of the IEP can help support the student's progress with that goal. And so, why are they important? We're going to talk about that on the next slide. Goals are really important because they're actually addressing the needs that we identified in the PLAB statement. With a good, strong PLAB statement, we can identify some really key areas that we can target. And so, is this a reading fluency, reading comprehension? Is it math related? We can really pinpoint those needs and then address those needs through these goals. And then we can assess whether the special ed program is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make appropriate progress. And so, thinking about where the student is and where they need to go, and how we can get them there. Is the special ed services or aids that we're providing, is it getting them the progress that we need? And we can use it as a tool to really promote those high expectations and access to the general education curriculum, depending on the students, in light of their specific circumstances. And so we can use goals and the progress that we can make through those goals to help really promote their participation in the general and success in the general education curriculum. And so on the next slide, let's dive into what IDEA says about goals. So just like we did with the PLAF, Tamara's going to, thank you, Tamara, put in the tip sheets for the measurable annual goals. But I want you to take a minute and really focus in on what the law says, what IDEA says about goals and objectives, remembering that this federal law kind of sets the baseline, it sets the standard for where states then build off from. So I want you to think about what does this law in particular say, and what stands out to you. Good, Lori, thank you. Yeah, meeting the child's needs, right? It's individualized, right? That's the I in IEP, and we want to make sure that they are designed to meet the student's needs and enable progress in the general education, right? We want them, as much as possible to be making progress within the general education curriculum. Exactly. Yes. Yeah, I'm seeing some hearts and stars for that one as well. Yeah, and so some of the key words there really are progress, right? And Andrew helped define really more of what meaningful progress looks like. And we really want to be thinking about in light of the child's disability, right? In light of their needs, how can we help and support them to make the progress that they need to be successful with their goals and with their outcomes? Again, going back to what Tamara said, what is the bigger picture, right? What is our end game? I tend to work with kids that are a little bit older and start to think about transition. And so, really thinking about once they step foot out of high school, what is the end game? What's the goal here? And yes, Georgina, meeting other educational needs as well. And also want to point out those taking the alternatives assessments, they have to have benchmarks or short-term objectives. I know some states require it already, regardless, but the federal law does say that if your child's taking an alternative assessment, that you would need those benchmarks and short-term objectives. So just something to think about. But we're going to move on to the next slide. And I love this line because it provides, I think, a great visual that really helps it make solidify it in my mind. But we always start, and sorry, Tamara, this one's got some animation for you. So we're going to start with the PLAS statement. And the PLAS statement is what provides us with our baseline, right? Where is the student right now as we're writing, as we're meeting as a team? Where are they? And then if we click again, we're going to think about where do we want them to go? So what is our goal and what can we achieve? What do we want them to achieve? What progress do we want to be made in a 12-month period, right? We're not, thinking 10 years down the road. We're thinking about what are we going to accomplish in this 12 months? And in between that, if you click again, and again, one more time, is thinking about those special education services and what can really help us get from that baseline of the plan to the goal, to being mastering or being successful with the annual goal at the end of this IEP year. And so be thinking about where we are, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. And that's really what the goal of the IEP development is. And so specifically thinking about goals, if we go to the next slide, they should focus on student behavior, not on what the educator is doing, but what the student is doing, what the student is making progress on, what the student is mastering, what behavior is in need, and whether that's an academic skill or behavior, we want to keep it student centered. We want to be able to monitor it with enough frequency to determine progress. And so we can make those timely or instructional intervention decisions as needed. If we only set, they just need to show it to us once. That's not going to give us that nuanced data that we want to really understand, is this student making progress? And then we also want to be measuring using objective, valid, and reliable measures. And so those are things like our curriculum-based measurements. For behavior, we're looking at direct behavior rating. We're also thinking about systematic direct observation. And by using these tools in combination with a high frequency of data collection use or appropriate frequency of data collection and use, we can really take that subjective nature out of the student's progress, out of the question of, is the student making progress or not? And so we can move away from those teacher anecdotal notes, which are really important, right? They provide the context that we need. But when we're thinking about progress reports, when we're thinking about truly understanding, is the student making the progress that we need? These tools are going to be critical to help us really make those objective decisions. And also thinking about goals should be realistic yet ambitious. Kids only know what we expose them to, right? They only learn what we provide them, instruction on. And so be ambitious with these goals and be realistic based on their overall needs, wants, desires, and what the overall outcome is. And so keeping that interplay of those two always in mind. All right, next one.
Yeah. And then just really quick, just to highlight too, when we think about them being ambitious too, if you joined our session yesterday, we were talking about high expectations for our students and how sometimes we have generally, not intentionally, we can have generally low expectations for our students. So keeping in mind when we are creating these goals, that they're ambitious and we're keeping high expectations at the forefront. Um, and also for them too, right? For our students, we're trying to build confidence in the skills that we want them to be able to do. So, just keeping those high expectations in mind, having high expectations for our students.
Right, right. Absolutely. And so when we are, and this gets to where we want to make sure that we have a clear focus of the goal. And by doing that, we really want to target what specific knowledge, skill, or strategy does the student need to develop, to ensure progress, and reduce the impact of the disability on that child's progress in the general education curriculum. And so really thinking about, what are we going to focus on? And this may help us get away from having the 27 goals, right? One student, maybe we can take those 27 and condense it into one really meaningful goal that's going to impact a lot of different areas. And we'll get to that in our next slide. But be thinking about, based on our PLAFT, again, based on the data that we have, what knowledge, skill, or strategy do we need to address to really ensure the most meaningful progress for this student? And so we're going to do a little activity to think about and start to practice identifying the focus of the goal. So I want you to meet GH. He's a sixth grade student with a specific learning disability in math calculation. And so I want you to take a minute and I want you to go over the impact of his disability and needs. And so we pulled this from his PLAF, just little excerpts. Just thinking about the area, the focus of potential goals. And so just take a minute and read that for me. Okay, now that we know a little bit about GH, I'm gonna get you to click again, and we're gonna do a little waterfall activity. So I want you to think about, what should the area of focus be for the goal? Looking at the impact of his disability, looking at the needs, and I would really focus in on that impact of disability. I want you to think about, what should the area of focus for the goal be? And I want you to type your response in the chat box, but I don't want you to hit enter yet. Don't hit go, don't pass go, don't collect $200 yet. I want you to just hold that thought, put it in the chat, and then I will prompt you to send your response, and we'll do it all at the same time and see what ideas that we had come up for the focus of this goal. So I'm going to give you 1 second. Type in that focus for me. I see math fluency, math computation, automaticity. So going back to that fluency, fluency again. Yeah, and so I'm seeing a lot of fluency, and I agree. I think that's really what's impacting his progress in the math curriculum, right? We could get in specifics about because he's in 6th grade, and so we're going to be talking about fractions and multiplying fractions and dividing fractions and algebraic concepts and all of those things, right, that are part of the 6th grade curriculum. But if we can really hone in and focus and target that math fact fluency, that's going to really support him to be successful with some of those more complex grade level tasks. And so really thinking about how we can use that one goal, that area, that focus area to really get the most bang for our buck is what I like to think of it as. So great. I think we are all on the same page here. And so that's just the importance of goals. And I'm going to turn it over to Tamara now to talk about some strategies for goal development.
All right, thanks, Brittany. So we talked about the PLAF, right, where you're identifying the student's needs in academic achievement and functional performance, and then talking about those measurable annual goals. What does IDEA says about measurable annual goals, and then how to determine what your focus of those goals are. So in this next part, we're going to talk about strategies for that IEP goal development. So first, just wanting to share some questions that you should keep in mind when developing those measurable annual goals. So first and foremost, what is the information that we need to create an annual goal? And we talked about that, right? When we think about that PLAF statement. So in that PLAF statement, identifying what the primary needs are for that student that's going to require the special education and related services. How is each target need being described? What are the expected target goals for these behaviors? And then what are those unique circumstances that might be impacting the student to achieve those grade level expectations? And then what is the measurable baseline for each of those target goals? So in the next slide, what we're going to look at are the essential elements of a measurable goal. So today we'll look at 3 different essential elements. So the target behavior, the condition, and then the level of proficiency and timeline. And I am just curious, just to hear from you all, any guidance that you may have from your state, your district, or just your school. Are these the 3 essential elements that you also focus on when you're developing your measurable annual goals? And if not, is there another way that, or I guess another guidance or different areas you might be focusing on as well? Just out of curiosity. So maybe we're not doing anything different, and these are the 3 areas that you also focus on. So I'll just move us along and first talk about the target behavior. So the target behavior, defining it as that academic or functional skill to be changed. So using these guiding questions when we are identifying the target behavior for that measurable annual goal. So what do we want students to be able to do? Is that behavior observable and measurable? Because again, we are going to collect data on that specific behavior. So is it observable? Is it measurable? Is it functionally relevant replacement behavior? And is this a measure of student behavior and adult behavior? So again, going back to that point, Brittany shared with you all when you're developing those IEP goals that they should be focused on the student behavior and not that adult or the educator's behavior. And then with the condition, so the context or the environment in which that target behavior is to be exhibited. So under what context will the behavior or the skill be expected to occur? And then what's the level of independence? So when we're thinking about those condition statements, you probably have heard, when given 30 first grade sight words, or when given a third grade passage. So thinking about those conditions, and that's for academic. But if we're thinking about behavior, are we going to provide that child with a certain amount of reminders when they're exhibiting that targeted behavior? So that will be the condition. And then the last area will be the level of proficiency. So when will the mastery of skills be expected to occur? What is the level of accuracy? And then how many trials? So we've seen that in some IEP goals is the number of trials in which we want the student to perform that specific behavior. And then on this next slide here, just pulling those three essential elements together is using a template for the IEP structure. So when given and you see in the brackets there, that's where you would add in the conditions. So that grade level and the tool that the student would be provided with. The student will, you will add in the behavior, and then lastly, that level of proficiency of timeline. So I didn't hear any I didn't hear any objections. So it sounds like you all are using a similar format for when you're developing those annual goals, or maybe you might be training staff to do it in a similar way. But I have seen sometimes where they break apart that level of proficiency and timeline, where it has to be really specific to show, by May 2026, or and then in addition to the level of proficiency. And then also just to let you know that this particular portion of the presentation is also pulled from one of our modules, in which we'll share with you later on. So if you're looking to do a deeper dive in this particular area, we'll share the link with you to the module. So next we're going to look at an academic goal example. So I will be engaging you all with a short activity looking at this example. So first we have a draft goal here. This is Jesse. And for the draft goal, it says Jesse will read 65 words per minute. So if we have our little graphic organizer here where it has those essential elements of goals listed. So when we think about the condition, the target behavior, and that level of proficiency / timeline, what portions or what elements are missing from that draft goal? Feel free to go ahead and add that in the chat. What is missing from our draft goal? Condition. Mm-hmm. Condition, condition, timeline. Yep, perfect. So I'm seeing those two things. So let's go through our checklist. So yes, like you all said, the condition is missing from this goal. So we're not in this draft goal, we're not describing the context under which this skill will be expected to occur. The behavior is there, right? We want Jesse to be able to read 65 words per minute, so that's clear. But you also identified that the level of proficiency of the timeline is missing from this goal. So currently in our draft goal, we're not describing what the level of accuracy, how many trials they'll have to be able to demonstrate this. So those two things are critical and they are missing. So if we look at our revised goal, and again, these are not exemplars, but based on our revision, are all three things present: the condition, the target behavior, and the level of proficiency or timeline. So all three of those components are there. We now have the condition. They're given a second grade reading probe, and then that level of proficiency was added. That Jesse's going to read those 65 words correctly in 1 minute with 95% accuracy across 3 consecutive probes. And like I said, this is not an exemplar. There could be other ways that this goal could be revised to include additional information, but at minimum, those 3 essential elements are present in this goal. So let's look at a functional goal example. And as a reminder, those functional goals are meant to increase the access, participation, and/or the independence of that student in the general education curriculum or setting. So the draft of this goal. So during each 40-minute class, Jose will pay attention and be engaged 95% of the time. So looking at our essential elements, what are we thinking? What's missing? I would ask about what engagement looks like and how do we measure pay attention. That's a great question. Good.
That's
So let's
starting to
go.
get in that subjective territory, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let's go through each of these pieces, right? So I didn't hear anyone say condition, so the condition is there. So during each 40-minute class. So now moving into target behavior. So we're not going to put an X here because it is questionable, right? We had a question about what does that mean to pay attention and be engaged, right? So it's very subjective. How will we measure that? We want to be very specific about that target behavior and make sure that it's clearly defined on what we want Jose to be able to do. So that would be the first thing that, if we were an IEP team right now, we would discuss this and say, what would be a clearly defined target behavior for Jose? And then also questions, right, around the level of proficiency in the timeline. We said 95% of the time, but what does that mean? Is that realistic? Are Jose's peers even engaged for 95% of the time? So there will be a lot of questions, again, as a team that we will want to discuss to say, how can we revise that goal? So if we look at a revised goal, and again, not to say this is an exemplar, this could still also change. But having all of those components there, where we talk about condition, the behavior, and the level of proficiency. So again, that condition is there, but he will remain academically engaged at least 75% of the class for 5 consecutive days, as monitored as that by the daily DBR. And again, this is going to be a tool that we're going to use to one define those behaviors of what academically engaged looks like, and we'll have really finite data of what 75% looks like. So again, not the end all be all. There will be a lot of discussion that you will have as an IEP team to determine if that goal is realistic, if it's objective, and it's going to measure what it should measure. So a couple things that we want to bring up is to ensure, we talked about it, that those goals are measurable. So the students' annual goals and objectives in the IEP simply do not contain objective criteria. So always having those discussions, if that target behavior is measurable, is it objective, but also still going through those other required components and ensuring that the measurable goals pass what we call the stranger test, right? If we say this is the target behavior, would that stranger be able to also observe that same behavior? And then also keeping in mind, we just had a discussion. There's still a lot of discussion about that behavior goal, about what 95% is, what that target behavior is, but making sure that we're monitoring our usage of those rubrics that we might utilize to measure those target behaviors, considering what words we might use in the goals, and make sure again that they can be measured. So a rule to live by: if you can't graph it, it is not measurable. And something that you also might be experiencing too is the misuse of those percentages, right? So sometimes those percentages might be meaningless. So we were again going back to that goal. If we say 95% of the time, what is that? What exactly does that mean, right? When we say 95% of the time, how are we able to measure that? What does it look like? So we want to be very careful and meticulous about how we select those percentages of accuracy when we're developing those IEP goals. And then we also want to leave you with um, this acronym here, right? Keeping those annual IEP goals fair. So the F meaning feasible. Is that goal appropriately ambitious for the student given their circumstances? Is the goal realistic? Can it be achieved in one school year? And is that reflected in the IEP? The A for acceptable. Is the goal acceptable for the student, the family, and the educators and the IEP team? So as we had just a very small discussion about a draft goal and how it could be revised to be a better goal that's maybe more realistic or acceptable for all and for that particular student. And the I for impactful. It will achieving this goal positively impact that student's access and benefit from the general education curriculum. So going back to what does IDEA say about the purpose and the reason for those measurable annual goals? And then the R, the relevant. Does the goal connect to a meaningful outcome for the student and his or her family? So when we talked about progress for students with disabilities, right? At the lowest level, we think about the student's IEP goals, but then also how could this impact them if we think about the general education curriculum, if we think about those state assessments and beyond that, that post-school success. And then, like I've shared before, we have these opportunities to collaborate for the goal development. So similar to the activity that we just did, where you all were questioning, I'm questioning this target behavior. I'm questioning the condition. I'm questioning the level of proficiency or the timeline. These are all questions that would initiate that collaboration for that goal development to again to make sure it's fair and that all of these things. That you identify in the annual goal are appropriate for the child. So using the data and the insights from everyone on the IEP team, from the teachers to the families, the students, and then other providers, aligning those goals to student needs that require special education and related services, facilitating again that open communication across all IEP team members, and then documenting those contributions. So if you did have a lot of questions and discussions around what might be appropriate for the child, making sure that you document that. And then lastly, we want to continuously ask ourselves when we're developing these measurable annual goals for our students, are the goals we write adequate and appropriate to determine effectiveness of our special education and related services? And then I'm going to pass it to Brittany, who's going to close us off and present you all with some resources to further your learning in this area.
Yeah, so we first want to start off our closing by getting your thoughts. And so what if you go to the next slide, yeah, what is on your mind? So do you have any questions for us? Do you have any thoughts about so far what we shared? So please come off mute. We have a few minutes. Come off mute or put it in the chat and we'd love to discuss that.
It's towards the end of the day. We got a
It
quiet group.
is. It is. It is, but I love the insight that you guys have been providing in the chat and thinking about, how you use it in your school and in your schools in your state. And it gets to the reminder that, this is the foundation, right? IGA provides that federal foundation, and so things may look slightly different in your state or your district or your school. And so I know in some states I work with. Objectives are required for all grades or baseline information. And while those, doesn't hurt anything, right? It's all good things. It can look different from state to state. And so make sure you take a look at your specific state and district requirements when you're going over these. But it is always good to have those key components of the goal to connect it to the PLAFT and making sure that we've got the right services and supports in place to make that goal happen. Um, and so we've got a question about how others deal with general ed teachers providing present levels when requested. This is an area of concern. And so, Wendy, are you talking about when you're getting their input for the present levels?
Yeah, we send out, because we're a full inclusion school, so we send out a document like a couple of months before, letting them know the IEP is coming up. And they have all of their goals. They have everything. We want to get like their present levels, like what they're working on, what the teacher's perspective is. Because
Mhm.
our resource teachers, they kind of know what's going on, but for the family and the parents, these children are in a gen ed class. They want to know, what does the teacher think? So
Yeah,
we want to make sure that the language that we use is really reflective of the teacher and not just kind of like all sped stuff, because that makes it much realer for the parents. So,
yeah,
but sometimes they're just kind of like at a lack. They just want to have somebody else do it, or they give like one or two sentences, and it's frustrating. So I have out of the 13 teachers I have a handful that give the most amazing, and I try to have them encourage them to share. But I was just wondering if there's anybody else that has any suggestions or if they deal with that.
Yeah. I can throw one in real quick if you want. We think about teachers like we think about students. Everyone's a little different, right? And some are very verbose and helpful, and some are a little more um, restricted, right? And their feedback. And so for those that you think are more restricted, instead of sending a blanket, how's the student doing in your class? Really providing with some targeted questions, maybe some of the needs that you're talking about as part of their PLAFT, getting their opinion on it, or what does it look like in their classroom? How is it impacted? And so being more targeted with your questions with those teachers that maybe um, aren't as willing to share, or maybe don't know exactly what, to share, that could really
Yeah,
help.
more focus, probably because I noticed that one person said about the template. We do give a template, but maybe the template does have just too much. So it's not easy for them to focus. So that would probably be a better idea is to give them something more focused to get a better response, just like the kids.
Right, right, right,
You got to
exactly.
individualize it for the teachers too.
Right, right. And some teachers have been there, right, 40 years, and some have been, they just got thrown in last week, on a provisional license.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's
of
there's a
course.
whole gamut. And so yeah, I think as specific as you can be based on what what you're looking for in terms of their input. Uh,
And when sorry,
oh, go
I was
ahead.
saying, Wendy, I'll also share a resource from the Progress Center about knowing your student. We've done this with different audiences, including general ed teachers, where they don't realize some of those like more relaxed conversations that they're able to have about what their student is can and cannot do. They don't realize that that translates really well into a present level. So I'll just share
Right.
that with you to see maybe if that's something that you can use and adapt in your context, and not just for that. I mean, you sounds like you have like a larger group of teachers who may benefit from this resource. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
put that in the chat, and maybe you can use it, adapt it to fit your needs. And try to see if that can get them to talk a little bit more about what students are can and cannot do. And I think I realized too with general ed teachers, it's like when you get really hyper focused on the IEP sometimes too, they're a little more hesitant because they're like, what am I supposed to say? And sometimes anything
Yeah.
that they can share is going to be more
Yeah.
beneficial than kind of being hesitant about I guess not sharing anything at all. So maybe you'll be able to use that.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. I mean, the majority of them really are great because it's not easy. It's not easy having a full inclusion program when you have your 25 kids and then you have six or seven that have IEPs and they all have individual needs and different things. So we know that it's not easy, but the majority of them, they really do a great job and they really try. And so I know that they have it in them because they're really great teachers. So I was just wondering for some strategies, but that would be great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no
Yeah,
problem.
thank you. Thank you for bringing that to the group. And I see some good conversation happening in the chat about the dead man test. That is another popular one in addition to the stranger, or the stranger, sometimes known as the substitute test, right? If a substitute teacher walked in, would they be able to understand and articulate the goal? And so I love the conversation in the chat, and I'm glad that it seems like this session was useful. So thank you all, and thank you all for your participation. I want to highlight a few resources before we let you go. And so I wanted you just to see that in addition, we still have these IEP tip sheets for the PLAB statement, for the goal statement. If you visit the website, we have the other components as well. But I want to skip over to the next slide. So the next one after this one. Yep. And the Progress Center also provides modules. And so what we did today was we touched on a lot of high level, points in terms of talking about goals and developing goals. But if you want to dive a little bit deeper, the Progress Center provides excellent modules to help you do that. So just wanted to draw your attention to that. Also, our partners, we provide webinars as well. And so just different formats and different ways that you can connect with this information, learn more about this information, or for those of you that are in the role of supporting teachers and other professionals in the schools, resources that you can share with them. But then our friends over at the National Center for Intensive Intervention have provided these excellent academic and behavioral goal setting booklets and manuals, if you will. And it's really helpful to really understand how to set an appropriate and a bit ambitious goal based on the student's needs. And so they provide a lot of different strategies and different ways that you can set those goals for both academic and behavior. And so if that is something that you're leaving with, yeah, I want it to be appropriate and meaningful, but what does that even mean? How do I even start that? These are excellent resources for that. NCII also provides webinars on setting high quality goals. And so providing, again, just a different format to be thinking about how we can set those high quality and appropriately ambitious goals. In addition to that, you can find a whole host of resources, toolkits, tip sheets, you name it. Progress Center, the website is a one-stop shop for you. And so please feel free to visit that for all kinds of resources, not just for goals, but for all the components of the IEP. And then you can also find us on social media. On the next slide. And so we are on Facebook, we're on X, we're on YouTube. And so we ask that you subscribe, and so you can get the latest and anything that's happening related to high quality IEPs and building successful special education systems. And so please feel free to interact with us that way. And also please, on the next slide, feel free. This is our contact information. We're part of AIR, and we would love, to engage with you in any way that is helpful for you.